Okay, so I'll start sharing the screen with you now. Okay, so I'll show you what's up on the middle page first of all then. Okay, so you have the, of course, the module guide, but one thing extra, as well as the SPSS program, which you already have installed, I'm sure, anyway, on your Mac or PC, you'll have now the NVivo program there as well. Okay, so the NVivo link there to the actual cloud to actually download the program, a Mac or a PC Windows version is there. Okay, then it's a bit different from the SPSS installation process. You just download the actual program, then you install it. It doesn't ask you for a code when you're installing it. It only asks you when you start using the NVivo program. So the first time you open it up, then it'll ask for a license code, and the license code is there on the middle page. It's also in a folder, in a file, which is available when you download as well, but it's up on the middle page too, so you can copy that and paste it into the space provided when you're installing NVivo, basically then. Okay. Then the first time you use NVivo after that, you'll be asked about all the information about your name and stuff like that, your email address. Stick all that information in just to fill up the blanks. So it'll allow you to progress to start using the actual program. There's a bit where you have to put in your initials as well. So put your initials into the box, there'll be small box that's provided as well. And then you just click OK and you'll start being able to use NVivo. Don't worry about NVivo at the moment, really, anyway. Ultimately, it's good you have installed earlier, so you can always skip ahead at some stage to just have a look and try it yourself. There's extensive tutorials online on YouTube and so on about NVivo. Of course, and there is within the program too, links to these sort of training for NVivo as well, that the NVivo provide themselves to the QSR NVivo people included. They're quite short, 5-minute things as well, which I'll be doing to some extent with you anyway when I'm going to do my lecture with you and demonstrate it too later on in the course. But it's there available for you if you wanted to jump ahead a bit. But at the moment, it's all the old-fashioned way we're going to do first. We're going to do it by hand, a thematic analysis by hand. And that's what the first test is about doing it by hand. And that's just basically a Word document with the transcribed text on it, highlighting parts of it, giving them different colors, like as if you had the paper and pencil version, you had the paper in front of you and you were just getting your highlighter pen out basically, and you were starting to highlight basically as you go along. Basically, like you summarize things when you're highlighting, maybe you've printed out an article and you just highlight things of interest. Same thing when you're doing this with transcribed interview, but of course we'll be doing it in a Word document basically then. Okay, so we're doing it in a Word document, be highlighting parts of the text. The wife's going to get it. She's coming. She's got the extension upstairs. Okay, so she can so you can highlight as you go along. So you're going to do that by hand first, but obviously you're just doing that in a Word document and highlighting using the highlight colors within Word, and then doing coding and so on and getting themes from that in a Word document form only. Still, some qualitative researchers do it that way, basically, rather than use software packages like NVivo, for instance. But we're going to do both. We're going to do it the old way and also using software with NVivo. The NVivo will be used for the report, the second assessment. So basically, only up until we start using NVivo, we'll look at the schedule there. You'll see based on the schedule we'll have on the middle page that the thematic analysis by hand test is on the 22nd of February, basically then. But we do cover using NVivo before that, just as a preliminary, before we start going through what we're required for the report after you do your test. Okay. Ultimately, the focus is still doing your thematic analysis by hand, but it's good practice because ultimately, whenever you use NVivo, you're going to have a Word document in there or an Excel file in there with the text in it. And you're still going to highlight as you go along, but within the NVivo program, there's just obviously some more extras with the software package where it helps you connect to themes. And it also allows you to do a word cloud and a thematic map and things like that too, to show a diagram of your thematic analysis, which you can't do if you're doing it by hand. Basically, you have to draw everything out manually then by hand. Basically, while it does it more automatically within NVivo. So there'll be some advantages of using NVivo, obviously as well. That's why a lot of people use it. And when they're doing qualitative research, ultimately you're going to use it for the CA2, the report itself then. Okay, so there's time to get used to doing that. In the second half of the module after the reading week there, you'll see it's all about using in vivo. I'll continue on showing you an example, how to work through and do an analysis in vivo. And then it's about doing your analysis then for the qualitative data we have for the report. There'll be an Excel file with short answers, basically, from the research example that's used for your report. And you'll be analyzing those, similar to what you had in the format of your manual analysis you do. It's going to be short answers, basically. It's not going to be a big long interview with one person or 5 people or whatever. It's a number of people, basically, with short answers. So it's short bursts of text, a few sentences each time. Easier to manage in the time that's provided for you in the test, and ultimately for also to allow you have enough time to do it for your CA2 report as well. Okay, it's a mixed methods report. So one way of doing mixed methods is you have a questionnaire approach. So you have closed questions like yes, no answer questions, strongly agree, strongly disagree type responses, which you'll have in the questionnaire that's used for the CA2 report itself. Also, there can be an open-ended question or open-ended questions in there too, which require a typed response, for instance, with short answer response, open-ended, which is the case in your CA2 report. There'll be a mixed methods approach used there. There's a questionnaire given out originally with an open-ended question in it as well for the qualitative part. So with that background to that, much more detail will be given on that when we get to that stage. I'm going to give you general things about it today. I've mentioned about 2 hypotheses and things like that and stuff like that. I'll mention that again when I go through the actual CA description. But there's a lot more detail in there when we get to start that. When we get to that week after the reading week, when we're going to be doing the actual, or before the reading week and after the reading week there, when we're discussing the CA2 lab report, there's lots of files up there to give you background information about the questionnaires that were used, and there's ideas there for you about hypotheses. Then we can discuss those in class as well. Okay, so I'll give you more detail on generally about the CAs coming up anyway as well. Okay, there is then a coverage of quantitative, but not too much this time. Maybe it makes you feel a bit better. Okay, there's only a couple of lectures really there. There's one on one-way analysis of variance, and there's one on regression, basically then. Okay, there is repeated measures ANOVA mentioned too, but you only get the notes for that. We'll not cover it in class because we're not going to be having data that in our report that would be relevant for using a one-way or repeated measures ANOVA. It's not longitudinal data, it's not repeated measures data. So we can't use repeated measures ANOVA for that report anyway. So I'm only going to just put the notes up for it. We'll concentrate on doing the one-way analysis of variance and the regression in class together, cover the background to it, and then work through examples of that basically as well at that stage. Okay, including using the data that you have anyway for your CA2 report and doing some analysis using variables from that basically then, so you can get into what things could be done with the data. So you have to choose the variables for the CA2. Okay, you're okay so for everybody? Yeah, okay. Anytime you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself or send me a text in the chat. Okay, so that's the schedule anyway. So these first couple of weeks, we're going to just be bedding in and we'll get into the first lecture and then answer the first worksheet, the first exercise sheet. Basically, there's 4 questions on that, and they're covered in the first lecture. Okay, all right, so we'll do that first. So, so I've shown you the links here and so on to get the actual programs, the actual course of the outline there, the module guide is there. I'm going to go through that with you next. Just I've got highlighted some highlighted parts here just to reiterate what I've said so far to some extent and expand on it. You have qualitative and quantitative covered in this module. Okay, so it's not just qualitative, but it is a wee bit more coverage of qualitative because you're doing a qualitative by hand and also by using in vivo. So there's a wee bit more emphasis on qualitative versus quantitative in this module, but ultimately it's about the assessments. Obviously, the assessments, the 10% that you have from the worksheets is focused on qualitative really, and then also then the actual feedback analysis by hand. That 40% extra then is the 50%, make up the 50. And then of course when you're doing the CA2, there's qualitative element of that as well too. Okay, and we'll go into more detail on how that's assessed when we get to that part of the course when we're doing the CA2. I'll just give you a bit of a broad overview of the coursework for that at the moment. Don't want to bombard you with too much. Okay. So this is really the overall aims of what we're going to aim for to do this course. Really, you've got your quantitative analysis still. We're going to do more advanced statistics, building on what you've covered in the first research technique and analysis 1 lectures in the first course. So that's where we're going into one-way analysis of variance, what I haven't covered before, and regression analysis, multiple variables being used basically. Before, you would have done single pairings of variables like t-tests and so on were done before in your first research technique analysis 1 module. So now we're expanding multiple groups being compared. That'll be one-way analysis of variance, so 3 groups or more. Or with regression, having more than a pair of variables. It could be 2 variables in relationship to a dependent variable. So 2 independent variables and 1 dependent. So we go for an example of that as well when we get to that stage too. Okay. So that's the expanding on the quantitative you've already covered in the research technique analysis 1. Okay, too. So as I mentioned, we're doing it manually and also but using Vivo, we're doing the qualitative analysis. So the focus will be on manually for the first half of the course till we get to the test, the feedback analysis test itself. Okay, which will be done by hand, just like similar to the worksheet 2. The coverage of that worksheet 2 in terms of the doing the feedback analysis example there. Okay, and I'll show you that anyway. I think anyway before when we're going through the CA stuff, I'll show you the worksheets anyway. Okay. All right. So then the second half then will be the report, the mixed methods report, qualitative and quantitative. Okay. So where you'll have the opportunity to use the one-way analysis of variance or the regression analysis to analyze the quantitative data with 2 hypotheses being used. And you're doing the qualitative analysis of that short answer question, where the few lines that each participant is given about the particular focus, basically, of that research. Okay. It's a mental health orientated research, so it was. So I'll give you that. So we don't have to worry so much about, we'll go into more detail about what the variables are. It's focused on mental health, basically then. So there was an open-ended question on mental health as well, okay, in that particular piece of research. So you'll have the data from that, all provided for you. You don't have to collect any data. We're not giving you out a questionnaire for you to fill in the questionnaire and then that's your data being analysed. It's data already available from the last number of years where this research was done. It's real data on students basically as a sample. Okay, so it's ready there. It's just, I'll make it available when we get that stage. Okay. All right, so it's mixed methods then, it's quantitative, qualitative. So we have worksheets to cover, 2 worksheets. We have worksheets for the quantitative side as well in terms of the second half of the course, but they're not assessed. So that's why I'm going to probably use those as examples, and we'll work out the data that you've got for your report, and we'll choose variables from that, and we can discuss them in class about analysis and so on of them using one-way analysis of variance and regression approaches, basically then. Okay, but the first 2 worksheets they're the ones there you're going to have the 5% for each one. This first worksheet we're going to start into today, this week, is coverage of the first lecture. Basically, it's content, it's all short answer questions and content covered, basically then. Okay, so we'll go through at least first question today anyway. Yeah, thereafter I've covered some slides relating to that. Okay, so in terms of the plan then, the yellow area here is the first really half of the course, basically then. The introduction to qualitative data and the qualitative methods of analysis, basically then. Okay, so the themes there, the issues there are going to be covered in terms of the 2 worksheets and then basically the feedback analysis by hand test itself. Okay, so that's up until about halfway through, 7 weeks in, basically then. Okay, The second half, the blue area then, is for you then focusing on doing the lab report. So there will be a wee bit of using in vivo in the first half of the module before the reading week, but then that's going to be focused in on using it in terms of the open-ended responses you'll have from the data set you're given for the CA2 report, that 50% weighted report then. Okay. I'll talk about what nodes are and stuff as well. Nodes is something that's referred to in vivo as a code, and I'll tell you what a code is. We're going to have a bit of coverage of that when we talk about how to do feedback analysis anyway in the next coming weeks, especially when we cover the second lecture. It covers more detail about how to do a feedback analysis, the 6 stages involved that Brown and Clark. Basically, if you've watched the lecture's up there of Brown and Clark as well. It's not Braun and Clark, it's Brown and Clark. Okay, so points out right away, you know, the way the pronunciation of the name. So there's an hour lecture up there that they actually gave themselves about the article that we're focusing on. You see, that's the core text of the module, the Brown and Clark actual article itself, which I'll go through a wee bit later on with you. And the lectures, the first couple of lectures are based around coverage from that article. It's a big article. It's been cited so many times, thousands and thousands of times. It's a very big influence on the approaches to qualitative analysis. It's organized things much better. It's set out a stages approach, which wasn't really there originally in terms of qualitative analysis. It's much more of an organized approach to doing a feedback analysis then that they suggest with the 6 stages. That's why it's been embraced so well, and so many people are citing in their research and using that approach basically then. So we'll delve deeper into that, and we'll go into how they suggest the feedback analysis should be done. And that's ultimately what we're going to do ourselves when we do the feedback analysis by hand, and ultimately when we're using in vivo as well. We'll use that stages approach that they suggest, that systematic approach that they suggest.
Gary,
okay, yep.
Just before you go on, sorry, when I was reading through the CA2 description earlier, I noticed it said 6th edition APA. Is that correct? Because we've been using.
Yeah, it's wrong. It should have been 7. Yeah, I hadn't changed.
Okay.
It should be 7.
Sorry, I'm not trying to be pernickety. It's just
no. It's just I noticed that. I noticed that as soon as I put it up on an for goodness sake, I just left it then because it goes up for a few days. Yeah, it should be the 7th edition. Yeah, the APA.
Okay, that's
there's a slight difference. There's a slight difference now, and I wouldn't hold it against you if you did the 6th version. That's why if it's up there, I'll give you leeway with that anyway. I know the 7th edition, whenever you have more than 2 names, you do et al. From the very start. That's one big change with it. So if there's more than 2 names on the list of names of authors for the piece that you cite, then it's the first author et al., the surname of the first author et al. Right away from the very start. It's only if it's a single author or 2 authors which stays the same all the way through. That's one big change. The other change is really taking out the place for the publication of a book, for instance, then. So it's only the public.
Gary's gone?
It's not just me. No, he is gone. Yeah.
It's only the...
Back soon, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, he's gone.
Oh. Back in the room. Let's stop doing you back in the room again. Okay, so I'll go back and share the screen again. Okay. All right. So is that okay, Emer, then? Yeah. Yeah. So it's
That's
just
perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
I haven't changed it. Yeah, I just missed it. Yes, okay then. Okay. All right. So there's a wee bit of leeway around that because I made the mistake of not changing it from 6 to 7 anyway. Okay. Another thing that's mentioned you'll see in the blue area here is this power and effect size. It's not going to be a separate lecture on its own. It's going to be integrated into analysis of variance and regression analysis, basically then. So it's not a separate lecture. It's going to be integrated into the coverage of those statistical techniques, basically then. But it's just something to be aware of when we're quoting the results from those type of analysis. It's not just enough to be statistically significant. there needs to be a sizable impact, like a big difference in the means, for instance. That's the effect size really talking about there, the big difference in the mean scores being compared if you're comparing groups with the one-way analysis of variance. Or there a large correlation, a large beta value in regression. That's what the correlation referred to in regression. A beta value or a correlation, it's really what you would know it as based on your coverage of research, the first research and technique analysis module. So the size of the effect is important basically as well. And so that's taken into account when you report the analysis of variance and the regression analysis. So that's integrated into those lectures. So it's not a separate lecture on its own, basically. Yeah. Okay. So we'll have, of course, each week lecture and then a practical, basically in the second half of the class, basically then. Okay, so I'll try to minimize the amount of time I'm going through the slides, and I'll try to mix it up a bit. I'll go through the Brown and Clark article as well whenever I get to a certain stage of this first lecture, because really from about the second quarter onwards, basically then of this the slides here is whenever you're talking about thematic analysis, it's all from the Brown and Clark article. I've just summarized it on the slides. So I'll go back to the actual article, and there's a highlighted version of the article I'm going to go through with you, just for variety, just to show you where everything is in the article anyway, as another maybe a way of helping you be able to answer those worksheet questions, those 4 questions that you have on your first worksheet, basically, then that covers the content. Okay. Obviously, then this practical will be thematic analysis by hand as well, element in the first half of the course. And then whenever we get into the second half, it'll be using the software packages of SPSS and NVivo then. Okay, when we get into the second half after the reading week, especially when we're starting to work on the CA2 report. Okay, so I'll try and integrate that all together. As you're doing the analysis, you could be even doing the analysis for your report at the same time. It just you need to be on the ball about what variables you want to choose, basically then. So I'll make the information about the second CA available a bit further, before the reading week at least anyway, so you have time to have a look at that, basically, right? And you have a couple of weeks to decide on what variables you might want to use. So then you can hit the ground running. When we start doing the one-way analysis of variance and the regression, you already have chosen your variables. You've done some reading around the subject area, and you've got some research that connects those variables together in relationship to the hypotheses you have for the relationships you're looking at. So that's why there needs to be a bit of prior period of time where you decide. You can't just pick 2 variables at random and hope for the best, because you might not find much research connecting those 2 things together. So you want to lead around the subject a bit, have a look at the variables that are available to you, and I'll give you all that information earlier, at least before the reading week anyway, whenever we've got through the thematic analysis by hand stuff a bit more. Then you have time to have a read through and find some articles that maybe link those 2 variables, those pairs of variables you're going to use. You need 2 pairs of variables for the 2 hypotheses. Then you'll be able to actually then, of course, choose those and then use those when we're doing the analysis for one-way analysis of variance and regression. Okay. So a wee bit of preparation beforehand, then you can hit the ground running and do those as we do them in the practicals. Okay, all right, so that's the practical sessions after the short lecture to start with. As I said, the Brown and Clark article is the one we're going to focus on for this first half of the module anyway, basically then, before we start using NVivo and the SPSS in the second half. So that's why I have that prominently there as the core article. The power primer thing, the Cohen article, is going to link into when we start doing the actual quantitative analysis in the second half of the module, basically then. And any coverage in the slides will link into that anyway. Okay. We'll talk about it generally about the effect size, that size of the effect, basically then later on in the course. And you'll recognize Dancy and Reedy and so on again, and the other books you've had for the quantitative side for the SPSS side of things, basically then. There isn't really, I haven't really looked really any centered on anything from Invivo about using Invivo in terms of books and so on, because there's so much material available through Invivo, their site, and their tutorials they have basically that they provide, that they don't really need anything outside that, because a lot of the stuff that's covered in their tutorials, on top of what we cover in class anyway, will be more than enough for you to be able to use it effectively to do a qualitative analysis. Basically, then there is some in vivo books in the library. There is some qualitative analysis books in the library, basically, then, but I don't think you really need to consult them, because there's a lot of detail there through the YouTube that they give you links for their particular YouTube site and all the different training sessions they do. They're short bursts of information, 5-10 minute things, so they're not too heavy. But we're going to cover it in enough detail in class to be able to do the analysis anyway. Okay. All right. Now on to the nitty-gritty stuff, the assessments. Okay, so it said there's 2 worksheets. That's 10%, then 40% for the first half. Then, of course, will be the feedback analysis by hand and the class test, basically. Then, I'll show you the worksheets anyway. So I have the first one up here. For instance, you have 4 questions. What are the differences between quantitative and qualitative plans, the planning stage of doing qualitative, the ethics side of it, and also then what do you consider when you're conducting thematic analysis. Those 4 questions will be covered in the first lecture, basically. Then, so I'd say we'll be doing well. Maybe get the first one done today. We'll see how I go with that. Okay. So we have that first worksheet. So I'll work for it with you this week and next week. Basically, we'll discuss that. So if you want to skip ahead, obviously read through the rest of the lecture that we don't cover today, and look at the article, the Brown and Clark article itself too. We can discuss that next week in class and answer the rest of the worksheets. And basically, then the worksheet questions there as well. Those can get those 4 questions completed maybe next week. So then we can move on to the thematic analysis by hand. Basically, then the following week and move into lecture 2. Basically, then. Okay. So that's the first worksheet anyway. It's straightforward answer, short answer questions. Basically, then. Okay. Now, originally, I may as well be open about this. Originally, this wouldn't have been the case, but COVID, I think COVID has been your friend this time. Okay. I think COVID, you should be shaking COVID, not elbow bumping COVID at least for this. Normally, the test and any other previous year would have these short answer questions in the test as well. Okay. And you had to choose, there'd be 5 of them altogether. You'd have to choose 3 from 5 and answer those. And it was a closed book test. So you had to remember the answers basically then, and just get everything together in a short essay, short answers, alongside doing a thematic analysis by hand, basically then as well. That was the original test. But I went, there's not much point doing that now, because you could just have everything pre-prepared and bring it and put it all in chunks. So we'll do it as a worksheet and work through it, and we'll get the marks for it that way. And then we're just doing the thematic analysis by hand only in the test. Before it was thematic analysis by hand and those questions too, those short answer questions as well. So we're splitting it up and doing one before the other, basically then. And you'll still get the marks for each, obviously, then as well. Okay. So I think that saved a lot of worry about having to remember things, memorize things, because we can't do it that way, basically, this time. And open book wouldn't have worked, really, basically, because you could have had everything done beforehand and just put it all in, basically, then. So we'll just sort of do it to start with as we work through the lectures, basically, then. Okay, all right, so that's the 4 questions. Now, in terms of the second assessment then, the second worksheet. Okay, I'm just going to bring it up. I know you can't see it at the moment, but I'm just going to show you the second worksheet anyway. I'll make that available to you probably for next week, but it'll be a week in advance from when you're going to be doing it, basically then. This was the thematic analysis. It will be similar in format to what you'll have in the test. There's 50 teachers in this sample, and they got a short question, an open-ended question, basically, on what were the major factors that led them into teaching, basically. Okay, so what was the actual major factors that led them into going into teaching? Okay, oh, well, I'll do it because I like the holidays or something like that. You know, somebody actually said that. Then somebody actually did say that, like the long holidays. So there may be some, there's variations and reasons behind why they went into the teaching profession, basically then. So then you're coding these as you go along. So you'd highlight bits of the text, basically then, and give a label for it in the coding section. Then those codes link into a theme, basically then. Okay, so that process is there in the worksheet. You'll be working through that worksheet in the next coming weeks. First half of the module for the second worksheet. That's another 5% of your grade then. Okay, so there's 50 there. And to be open about it, your test will still be on the teachers. Your actual test itself will still be based on the teachers and why they went into the profession, but it won't be the same people, obviously. It's not going to be the same responses. There'll be different respondents from the one you have here, basically then. So it'll still be the same question, and you'll still have to do a feedback analysis by hand based on that same question and doing the codes and so on, the process, but it'll be different responses, okay, in the test. So this is a full mock of the test. It is teachers, it is what they've said in terms of what led them into teaching. You just get another bunch of teachers in your test with another set of responses there about why they went into teaching. So it is good preparation doing the worksheet. It does prepare you for the test, basically. Then you can always have that in front of you as well. It's open book test, so you can have the previous example, the worksheet in front of you to help you in terms of the process and other notes you've taken as well to help you do that analysis then in the actual test itself. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so you have this worksheet 2 then to work through, and that's another 5%. That'll take a couple of weeks to get through, basically then, as you work through it. Okay, so there's just highlighting, giving codes for each, and those codes link into themes. I'll go in a bit more depth, obviously, in that when we get closer to that stage. And as we go through doing the thematic analysis, the stages that Brown and Clark suggest, I'll go into more depth about what that can look like, the process itself, how you produce the theme, how you connect the codes to the theme, and so on. Okay. All right, so that's the worksheet. Not up there yet. I haven't made it available to you. It's visible at the moment to you, but I'll make it available to you next week. Okay, in advance. You have a couple of weeks beforehand to have a look, basically then. But our focus obviously is on the first lecture here and the first worksheet. Okay, and the Braun and Clark article is up there as well, and the lecture they've given, which is effectively going through the article, basically again summarizing it, basically then talking about those 6 stages of doing the thematic analysis. There is a lot of Braun and Clark. Brown and Clark have talked a good bit about their article. Basically, there's other versions of the lectures up there as well at various different places and conferences they presented at and so on as well. There's variations on it. I think it's probably the one that's the most introductory level. It's less dense. I don't want to bombard you with information. I think that one does a nice outline for you without going too much depth. It is pretty parallel, consistent with what was covered in the 2006 article that we have as our core text for this module then. Okay. All right, so that's the first part. Okay, so I think I'll have a look at if there's anything else to cover for you in terms of, and the second part obviously is in the lab report itself. So remember your test is on the 22nd of February then. Should be in this class at this time then from 3 to 4:30. It's an hour and a half long, 1 hour 30 minutes long to do the actual thematic analysis then. Okay. Of course, then the lab report is the second half of the module, so it's the very end of the module when you submit your lab report. It's on the 18th of April. Okay. So I'll give you a bit more detail about the assessments again. So you've seen the worksheets, 10% of your marker for those 2 worksheets. We're going to work through the first one today and start answering part of that, at least the second half of the lecture today. Okay. Then you've got the 40% for the thematic analysis by hand online class test. Similar to the worksheet, basically then, but different responses, obviously, but still the same question about what led those teachers into teaching, basically then. Okay. All right. So the 2 worksheets and then the open book P-mag analysis by hand test will give you that 50% for the first half of the module. Okay, so just emphasize the qualitative analysis by hand. You'll have the same, the worksheet will be similar to the actual test itself. Okay, and I'll talk about there's a slight difference for the test when we get to that P-mag analysis. There's an extra column as well, but you'll have to fill in some information in as well too. Okay, which is basically a quote for each one of the themes. It's only slight difference, providing a quote for each one of the things. And we're going to talk about examples of qualitative research as well to look at to show how they have reported results and so on too. Okay, that'll help especially for your CA2 report when you're writing up the results of your qualitative analysis in more detail. But if you're P-mag analysis by hand, you're just going to be at the stage of describing your themes and having a quote from each one for the test and so on. But it'll be a bit more detail provided in your report ultimately. Okay. So the second half was the quantitative report itself, quantitative and qualitative report. 2,500 words, you can be a bit more than that. Let's say 2,750 or a wee bit less, 10% either way. Okay, by the 18th of April. Okay, that's that. So it's both. So I know it says 6th there, but 7th for me really. But if you were not to use it all from the very start, I'm not going to hold it against you because I've said 6 there. So it's my bag, my fault. So if you do it the 6th edition way, that's fine as well. Okay. Okay. So it's you're choosing the variables. Okay. So remember that you'll have your data set, your quantitative data set available. It's a sample of students that are used for it. The main theme is mental health, so there are issues around mental health and all measured within the questionnaire. So there's a number of psychological measures in there, some demographic questions and so on in there as well, like age and things like that. Okay, so there's a mixture of variables there which you can then do various analysis with, either one-way analysis of variance or regression analysis, which will be covered in the second half of the module. You've had some experience with a lab report so far. Have you done one so far, have you? You've done not so far. I think you're doing another one for another module this semester, aren't you? As well.
Oh my God! Somebody help me out. What's the name of the module?
I know
Experiments, isn't it?
Experimental. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll have a bit of practice obviously this semester. I don't know which one comes in first, which is the deadline is earlier than the other one. But of course, that'll help. You'll get coverage from the other lecturers taking you for that. I think is that Kira taking you for that one? Ethical research methods. Yeah, Kira Define.
Yes.
Yeah. So she'll be covering. Of course, there's coverage of how to structure a report and that as well, and that'll be consistent with really what I'm going to be talking about whenever I talk about how to write up a report, a lab report, based on those sections of an abstract, an introduction, methods, results, and so on there, and discussion and references and so on. So that structure is what I'm going to go through in terms of how to report results, basically then how to do a lab report. So I'll go through that with you, basically in that process. Okay, there. So
we have to do it for a Stroop test.
We
have to do it for a Stroop test.
A Stroop test. The Stroop test would be that's experimental approach using the Stroop. That would still be a lab report you can write up based on using Stroop in some way. Yeah.
So we'll be very proficient.
Oh yeah, you'll be doing it a few times. Yeah, but that's what we want to do. Ultimately, in your second year, you'll be doing your thesis, your dissertation, which will be a big lab report, really. Same structure, just on a grander scale, about 9,000 words or so. Basically, then you'd be doing for that. Basically, so it's preparation for that dissertation. Basically, then similar structure. Basically, then. Okay. So the central variables, basically, and your variables that you're going to choose, basically those variables, let's say 4 variables, 2 pairs of 2, then you're going to have literature to link into that. So that's why I'm going to give you 2 earlier before the reading week. So you have a bit of time to read around the themes there, the actual variables there in that research. And there's some examples up there as well in the of articles linking into those variables they'll be made available to you as well, so you can read around those things and help you decide on what pairings of variables you're going to use, basically then. But I'll leave that to you in terms of what you decide. Okay. All right, so you can just suggest the variables and we can do them in class together if you wanted to have a look at the analysis and how it looks based on those pairings, if you've chosen them at that time. Okay, so it'd be great if you had them ready and good to go, all of you. So then we can do that as a small group. We can do that. Then you can, what's your, Caroline? What's your variables? And then I just go, okay, we'll have a look, and then we'll do them. And what's yours, Emer, and so on. That'll be great if we're at that stage and we're able to do it that way, basically then. So we can then cover the analysis you need. And with the worksheets there would just be examples of how to report results, not just give you the answer to those rather than work through them. Okay. All right. So that's using another data set, the worksheets in the second half, which aren't assessed anyway. They're just examples of how to quote results based on a one-way analysis of variance and a regression analysis. Okay. So you choose your particular variables. Just emphasize there again. So you choose your particular variables and you develop two hypotheses. Of course, I'll go through examples of hypotheses with you, predictions you make, basically then. There will be a significant relationship between anxiety and depression, for instance, as a hypothesis. Okay, so there will be a significant relationship between anxiety and depression. So you have to, well, we'll look at the variables and you can phrase things in terms of relationship terms. For instance, then you could use that with a regression analysis, being done with a regression analysis then. Okay, if you're looking at different age groups, differences across different age groups in terms of depression, basically then that'll be a one-way analysis of variance. Multiple groups, multiple age groups being compared. Okay. So a categorical variable would be the independent variable and the scale variable would be the dependent, a continuous score variable. Or two continuous score total variables, like two psychological measures being correlated with each other, would be a regression analysis then. Okay. If you have all the parts of a report, method, results, discussion, and we'll go through that in more detail. It'll be a lecture on how to just structure a report, basically then, how to write it up. Okay, what are the important aspects of each one. And the assessment will be clear about what's required in each one of those sections. There's a bit of a skeleton version here in this description in the middle, the module outline, module guide, and also in the CA2 guide. The CA2 guide is just this put into a separate document, basically then. Okay. So the discussion has those areas to cover as well. You'll have the SPSS file available to you, basically then, and you'll have a number of variables there you can choose from within that to get your two different hypotheses. There's just a suggestion here in terms of the third point, basically about what you could do. You could do a one-way analysis of variance for one of your hypotheses, for hypothesis one, and for a hypothesis two, do a regression. But you don't have to do it. You could do two one-way analysis of variance if you wanted, or two regressions, basically. You don't have to do one and one of each. Just depends on the variables you choose, basically, then what's suitable for what. Okay. You have the Excel file, which is just then a spreadsheet of all of these short answers to the open-ended question that was on the survey originally for your qualitative part. And then you just bring that in Vivo, and I'll show you how to bring in the Vivo files and analyze them in Vivo. Using a Vivo lecture before the break, before the reading week, and then we'll revisit it afterwards with that data itself that we're going to be using for the CA2 report. Okay. Okay, so that's the Excel file. There's one stipulation here. We talk about the nodes here and the child nodes and so on. That's all terminology that's used within NVivo. And we'll know more about that when we cover NVivo, basically then. Like basically NVivo can produce a thematic map where you have a circle like this leading to other circles, basically then. Okay. These would be the codes. That'd be code 1, for instance. That's code 2, 3. So that's as if whenever you looked at that data, we had all of those responses from the teachers, highlighting a bit of text and then giving it a label is a code. That's at the lowest level. Okay. then those codes can link into one common theme. And that's where the theme comes in here. So this is the theme then. Okay. And in Vivo, it's called a parental node. And these codes here are the child nodes. So just to give you a wee bit of background. So I always like say this as quickly as I can, really. When we're going to be using in Vivo, we're going to have kids together. So we're going to have children every week when we're going to be doing the actual. You didn't know that where you could do that by Zoom. Basically, that's what we're going to do. Okay, so when we're using in Vivo, we're going to have kids. Not too many, but enough for us to have a 4 themes from this. So we're going to build enough to have 4 themes. So we have 3 child nodes here with a theme. So you'd have to create another 3 themes. So this will be done another 3 times after this. It could be a certain number of kids we have per parent. Some parents have more kids than others, basically. You know, it's just like themes. Some themes have more kids than others, more child nodes than others. As long as there's 2 or more, we're all right, you know. 2.4, as you would say, in terms of average, isn't there, something around that? We want at least about 2 codes per theme, and we have 4 themes altogether. That's the minimum we're looking for in terms of your thematic analysis for your CA2 report. Okay. That's what this model mapping is about. That's what I've just done roughly there when I've drawn out one theme. And Vivo produces that diagram for you, basically then. Okay. But it doesn't in Macs. Has anybody got a Mac? Has anybody got a Mac out there? Does anybody use a Mac?
Yeah.
Just one of you at least?
Yeah.
One of you? 2 of you? Okay. But we can draw it out on a Word document instead. Macs don't produce the diagram in the way it's shown in the process using in Vivo. There's a process where you can do it automatically, basically then in one fell swoop whenever you do the thematic analysis. But for some reason, Macs don't do that. Only PC, Windows versions do that of the program. It used to be in the Mac, and then they took it out. I don't know why. Maybe there's some problem with the writing of the software or something like that, or permissions or whatever, or blocked. Maybe Macs blocked it in some way because there's a diagram. I don't know, but they don't have it basically then. So you can draw it out on a Word document instead. So we can make allowances for that for anybody using a Mac. You can do everything else apart from just draw that diagram out. But you can see I've just drawn it with a pen. All you do is you can draw it out with the circles and the arrows and so on in a Word document instead. Okay, so that's the only difference. The word clouds you can get as well as a word cloud. Remember those clouds you have large words and small words, just showing the frequency of the words occurring within a particular part of the text of a document. But that's something else you're going to produce a word cloud as well when you're using Vivo. That can be done with a Mac or a PC, basically as well. Okay. So as I say, 2,500 words for the lab report, slightly above or slightly below. And we have there's a wee bit of stipulation around the title, not more than 15 words. Good practice for you for your dissertation ultimately, because that's the sort of word length for a title you'd want in your dissertation. Abstract, 150 words, so it's an art in itself. It's a summary of everything you do in your report. That's done at the very end, but it's the very start of your report, but it's at the very end you do it when you have all your sections done. You summarize everything, bits from each bit of the report. We'll have examples of that as well in abstracts. Anytime you've read any articles, you'll have the summaries at the very start as well. Maybe that's all you read of the article is the summary, the abstract maybe sometimes, you know. So it's just a summary of all of the sections within the article itself, okay, within your report. So you have the breakdown of the marks for each section of the report there. But I'll have a more detailed version which has exactly where all the marks go. So I'll fill in these areas about feedback, and they'll have actually where all the marks are given in terms of anything you need to include content-wise. So the more detailed version that will be available just before the reading week anyway, so you have a bit of prior knowledge about what's expected from the report after you've got the first half done, basically then, of the course. Okay. So that's the coverage of the assessments and the module outline. We'll take a break now and we'll start the lecture after the break. Yeah, I'll have a break for 15 minutes then, so I'll stop the share at the moment and pause the recording. share the screen with you. Okay, so we'll go into the coverage of the first lecture. So of course, all that material is here in this section. There's the Brown and Clark phenotypic analysis article itself, the 2006 article. So look at that, because especially this lecture and also the second lecture, there's parts of it taken from that particular article itself. Basically, then I have a highlighted version as well, which I'm going to go through with you, and I'll show you that for next week. So I'll make the doing phenotypic analysis the next lecture available, and the highlighted version is obviously the bits where it's been drawn directly from where the lecture is covered, basically, as well. So it connects things a bit easier for you too, as well. So this week we'll concentrate on doing the first part of the lecture and the first question from the worksheet. And there's now 3 questions. We'll do those then next week when they start off, basically then. Okay, so we'll open up the qualitative analysis lecture itself. I'll just go to the start. As you'll see that I've highlighted some areas here already as well, just to make us a bit easier to cover things. Okay, so it's just a bit of background, which we've covered already about the content. Up to week 7 is the first half of the module, really, and we'll do the phenotypic analysis test to finish that off, that first half. So the 2 worksheets and the phenotypic analysis by hand test itself will be there in terms of coverage for the first half up to week 7. Then when week 6 onwards, based on the schedule, then we'll be concentrated on the CA2. Okay, so that's the mixed methods, quantitative and qualitative analysis for your CA2 report. Okay, just the lecture overview itself to start with here, and I'll show you where these come in terms of the worksheet questions themselves. The first question, basically on your worksheet, will address differences in quantitative and qualitative research, basically then. So that's the first question we're going to do in the first worksheet. Okay. The planning your study itself, that one will be the second question, okay, of your worksheet. Okay, so question 2 of the worksheet. So we'll work through that. When we get that stage, we'll work through that. So this, to be realistic this week, we'll stick with the first question. Okay. So planning your study will be the second question. All of the coverage in terms of that will be linking into the second question on your worksheet 1. Okay. Then we have, with the data collection, it still continues in terms of basically question 2. Okay. But within that as well, there's ethics covered as well. There's a couple of slides, 2 slides on ethics. That obviously will link into basically question 3 on your worksheet. So there's 2 slides specifically on ethics, consent and so on, and anonymity and things like that, debriefing and things like that as well, data protection and stuff. Okay, so that's covered in 2 slides. So that'll be relevant for question 3 on your worksheet, but ultimately ethics is part of planning your study, and of course links into data collection methods and so on as well. Okay, so ethics would be also included in, or you can at least refer to ethics in question 2, basically then the worksheet, because ethics is part of that process of planning your study and so on as well for your qualitative research. Okay. In terms of the Jefferson transcription and Jefferson methods, that's still also in terms of transcription, basically of the analysis itself, of the interview itself, basically then analyzed it. Well, that is also relevant for question 2, basically then. Okay. Then we go into the data analysis types. This is the types of thematic and the link into thematic analysis, basically then. Okay, so the different analysis types will be question 4, basically then. Okay, so link into question 4, because that links into basically decisions you make before you do the actual analysis. Okay, so there's a section in the actual Brown and Clark article that looks at decisions to make. I'll just write this out. So decisions to make prior to analysis. And the 4th question is around those lines, about decisions you make in terms of when you consider before you do the qualitative analysis or when you're doing qualitative analysis. Okay, so there's things to consider when you're doing that. So that's the 4th question in your worksheet. So the slides in this lecture will cover all 3 of those, all 4 of those questions. Okay, from questions 1 through to 4. Okay, So I've just indicated what the areas of the lecture link into each one of those questions. We're going to concentrate on doing the basically the first one today, obviously. So we'll do the first one together. We may get the second one started, but I'll say we'll be doing well to get the first one done. Basically, because I'm going to cover the slides with you, then we'll go straight into answering the question 1 of the worksheet then. Okay. As well. So obviously the data analysis types, which we're going to cover later on, that'll be next week, obviously. That all relates into the thematic analysis side of things. We're going to revisit that and how to do a thematic analysis in the second lecture, basically then. So this is a decision to make prior to doing the analysis in terms of thematic analysis. Then the second lecture will go into the actual process of doing a thematic analysis, which will be the second half of the Brown and Clark article itself. And you'll see that next week I'll have the highlighted version up there in terms of the article itself. And there's 2 colors for the highlighted parts. The first half will be highlighted in yellow, I think, if memory serves me correct, and the second half will be highlighted in blue, which is relevant for the second lecture. So you'll see whenever I put that up, make that available to you. I'll show you it now, actually, what I'm talking about. I'll show you the article itself, the highlighted version I have available there at the moment. Okay, which I'll make available next week. It's invisible to you at the moment, but you'll see that I've highlighted in yellow the first lecture, really, and things that link into the first lecture there, which I'll go into more detail with you next week, and then the following week when we're doing lecture 2 as well. So that yellow areas of the first lecture. Blue areas then kick in when we're doing the thematic analysis, and that's the second lecture doing thematic analysis. Okay, the 6 stages now being mentioned there of the 6 phases in the process that Brown and Clark suggest in terms of doing a qualitative analysis, and they go through those phases, and that's all the second lecture. Okay. That is just for us to go through and to prepare ourselves to do the thematic analysis by hand. When we do that, there's not going to be a specific question or a worksheet about that. It's going to be about doing the thematic analysis by hand, just by taking into account that process. It also shows you how to produce the diagram and things like that as well. There's examples from particular research that they pick out in terms of, I think it's a feminist sort of research that they were working on at that stage. Okay. Okay, so I have that in there as well. So have a look at the article. The non-highlighted version is there at the moment. Then I'll make this available to you later on for next week. So you'll see the bits that I've linked into the lecture itself. Okay. That's up there as well. Okay, so so that's just a breakdown of the questions and where they are in terms of the coverage in these slides. Okay. So when we go through each of those sections, I'll link into particular areas in terms of the questions on your worksheet. Okay. So this is obviously then when you start on quantitative research here, this is all for the first question. Okay, so I'll indicate that as I go along. Oops. Okay, didn't know I could do that. Hey, I can zoom in. Okay, so there you go. So I can then, so that's question 1. Okay, for the worksheet. Okay, I'll link into that. Okay, so that's question 1. So the quantitative research being covered, it's from the natural sciences. This is the gold standard that it had, where there's precise measurement involved in this. There's a cause and effect really looked at there as well. Controllability of course of doing the research. In the sense of maybe, for instance, in doing research on, for instance, talk about COVID-19 and treatment of COVID-19. Of course, there's control groups compared with experimental intervention groups in terms of testing drugs and things like that as well, where things are measured precisely, basically as well. And the manipulation of the variable is whether people get the drug or not, basically then, whether in the experimental group or the control group. So this all comes about from experimental work. And for instance, in the harder sciences, as we refer to them as, like for instance, chemistry and biology and so on, basically then, where there can be things can be measured precisely, chemicals and so on, substances can be measured weight and things like that too, where there's preciseness involved, and where there's physical outcomes that could be measured, basically then. Of course, psychology then tries to build on that. and actually try to still measure things precisely as possible, but with obviously using questionnaire approach or doing experimental work with some physical measures, but some other psychological measures in there, like questionnaires and so on too. So that the cause and effect elements for quantitative research, it's larger samples of people, so you can generalize to a population. Just like the quantitative research with the quantitative analysis approaches we talked about in the research technique analysis 1, where large samples were involved in those questionnaires and so on that were used as examples there and so on for the data you had for that instance then. And explanatory models is where you're really delving into things in terms of prediction, basically then. So the explanatory models really are explained by hypotheses. So hypotheses coming in terms of explanatory models. So you're going to have, of course, a more basic model itself when you have your hypotheses being covered. A hypothesis, you have 2 hypotheses then for your CA2 report. And that is an explanatory model. You've got 2 pairings of variables that you're going to see if the predictive relationship you have suggested between those variables does occur. And that's based on those variables being chosen because they have been researched before and they've been linked together previously to see whether your sample, the sample we have for our new data set, does that link into previous research and the expected relationships, do they occur with our new data, with our new sample, basically then. So there's methods then are adopted to actually measure behavior within psychology to do that, with questionnaires, for instance, being used to do that, basically, rather than measuring something like taking somebody's blood or to measure chemical content in their blood from the impact of the drug and things like that. Rather than having those physical measures, there can be the measures that try to tap into what's going on in a person's head in terms of their attitudes, experiences, and so on, basically then. Okay, and we're going to use that approach for CA2. We're going to have, of course, a questionnaire approach being used there, a number of variables measured, basically then. Okay. So qualitative research, obviously in contrast to that, still all relevant to question 1 here, basically then, because we're comparing quantitative and qualitative. There can be much more number of variables involved in that. I know when you look at some questionnaires, lots of things are measured, but there's multiple things can be addressed in even a short period of time in an interview with someone. They could talk about lots of different things at once, basically then. And there's things that cannot be measured maybe in that or defined easily, basically then. So then that's sort of more a vaguer, more sort of open interpretation things that are out there then could be addressed in a more qualitative way and looking deeper into the reasons behind that particular thing that occurs for that individual, that particular attitude they have, that particular behavior, that particular feelings they have for that issue and so on. So it's giving a deeper description. More individual oriented, while quantitative would be more collective, where it's a group of people, basically, that you then actually, they're representative of a larger number of people from the population. Okay, so this is a much more individual perspective. Obviously, smaller numbers of people being interviewed, maybe only 5 people, for instance, being interviewed, and it's about their individual perspectives. They're important. It's not about basically generalizing to any larger group. It's about what insights they provide for the topic that you're developing into and researching into, basically then. They're both empirical approaches. There's a systematic approach to being used for qualitative and quantitative. Empirical evidence is observed. You observe things occurring basically around you. And some would suggest it's an experimental approach does that the best, basically, as well. So experimental orientation. But it's observation and experimentation. If you look at any definitions of empirical evidence, it's things that are being observed, but others argue it's at the higher level is experimentation. So that's where the argument is from the quantitative side. Well, what's real empirical research is where you actually do experiments, where you control everything, manipulate the independent variable, and look at the effects of the dependent variable. It's the facts only. Everything is measured precisely. There's no subjectivity to it at all. It's all objective. But there's a grey area there. Evidence is evidence. Observation is observation. Basically, then, as long as there's a systematic way of collecting data from your observations, then you can analyze it. And obviously interviewing someone is collecting data, and you can analyze it through doing a qualitative analysis, a feedback analysis. Just like by collecting data from a questionnaire, you can do a statistical analysis on that. And that's all evidence. You produce an article, you publish the research, and that's empirical evidence that can be used in any literature review for someone who then conducts research connected into the research that's been done previously. All empirical evidence building on each other to look at particular phenomena, particular variables, particular issues, particular theories, then that they can collect evidence for, and so on along the way. So there's a lot of arguments that qualitative, quantitative research are all empirical. It's all empirical evidence. But the quantitative people would say experimental works the best, and that's really empirical, you know, in terms of experimental work, more precise, basically then. Okay. Okay, so that's in terms of the empirical approaches then, okay, as well, in terms of looking at empirical research. In terms of looking at qualitative researchers focus on the individual rather than the collective, just re-emphasizing that point again at the end there. So that's one difference, obviously a big difference between qualitative and quantitative. Okay, it's very structured. It's all predetermined in quantitative as well. Everything's done beforehand. You have your questionnaire constructed before you start giving it out to your sample, for instance. While unstructured and qualitative, and it's flexible then as well. So you can discover things as you go through the interviews, basically then. Okay, so it's all unstructured format, open-ended rather than closed questions. So there is one open-ended question in your CA2, which allows, of course, the respondents to talk about things in their own way, answer in their own way to that particular question, rather than the set responses, the closed answer questions for the rest of the survey. Okay. There's a close relationship for an interview. If you're face-to-face with someone, even via Zoom, there's still an interconnection there face-to-face. So it's closer relationship for the researcher to the participant in qualitative research compared with quantitative, where you might not meet any of them at all. It's all remote. Questionnaire given out to people through the online, through various sites and so on, through various ways to get access to them. You may not meet any of them, basically. So there's a disconnect there. There's a distance. Sometimes people like the distance. They could suggest it gives you a bit more objectivity and being close to someone in terms of face-to-face, in terms of an interview. There's subjectivity there, but you can make an argument. Everything's subjective to some degree when we're looking at psychology and we're looking at people's responses to a self-report questionnaire, for instance. While experimental research is different, it's more precise, more constructed, more factual, let's say. Okay, so there's social interaction in qualitative research. You have to have an empathy for the person that you're interviewing. You have to show a sort of understanding as well. So you have to have those characteristics as an interviewer, as a person, basically then, because there's going to be a lot of dialogue there, there's interactions. So you want to be able to make the person feel at ease so they can open up and talk about those issues, because some of them can be very sensitive issues as well for the person. Okay. This comment about sometimes researchers and activists are indistinguishable. There is an argument in the qualitative research that's more the case rather than quantitative. This is referred to in some areas as action research. So it's action research. So it's a much more practical orientation to it, where you're trying to find solutions to problems for the individuals involved, your participants in your research. So there's a stronger connection there, because ultimately you're trying to provide some sort of practical solutions, some application of your findings that can help them. When you're closer to someone, you're interviewing someone, you're getting at their particular needs, what they're talking about in the interview, maybe you're going to be more action orientated because you're face to face with them, basically, as well too. There's maybe an onus on you doing something about the problems they bring up to you in the interviews. Maybe not such more of an onus if you're distant from them doing a questionnaire approach. But there's people in a quantitative sense do also do action research, as long as it's focused on practical solutions as well, basically then, to issues that come up every day for those individuals in your sample, basically then. So there still can be an outsider for quantitative, but if they're action oriented, they may go to the people, get at the issues, and still produce some sort of questionnaire which taps into those issues and sees whether there's some sort of answers that could be used to make changes, to make things better for those individuals. But qualitative research is maybe easier to do that because you have that interaction, open interaction with the individuals for interviews, for instance, or focus groups. Okay, so more of an insider for qualitative. So in terms of qualitative research as well, still on question one, just continuing on with question one in your worksheet, basically then. Looking at just qualitative research, it's the aims of it in terms of these emerging themes and concepts, immersion being the important word here, emerging themes, emerging theories, basically then. There's an argument, because whenever they say which is more important, quantitative or qualitative, there's an argument from the qualitative side of things that the things wouldn't have been discovered if it wasn't exploration, talking about things, asking people first, then seeing that's a problem, that's an issue, and then maybe you look at it on a larger scale with a questionnaire approach, for instance. So emergent theories could be like, for instance, grounded theories, things that happen to people every day, for instance. So there's that approach. That's one of the qualitative approaches, grounded theory approach, where, for instance, hitting rock bottom is an example of that. Hitting rock bottom, you might have heard of that before, where people have to hit rock bottom first before they go into treatment for addiction. They've lost everything. They've lost their family and friends. They've lost any money they've had. They're homeless. Basically, their health is getting worse and worse. They're lying in the gutter. They've lost everything, and they realize, I have to do something or I'm going to die. That's it. So then they go into treatment. That was all just free interviews with individuals, and just finding that thing was the thing that spurred them on to go into treatment. So that was just by conversations. That's just by talking to people through interviews that was discovered, basically then. So there has to be exploration. Emerging things like that are more easily done with qualitative approach. While quantitative is all about confirming things, but you have to have something to confirm to start with, basically then. So there's an exploration first before you actually try to start confirming. So there's no argument maybe qualitative. It has to be there first, at least, where you'll be able to discover things, because it's more flexible that way. The qualitative ideographic is the individual approach, individual orientated. It's about their needs, their issues specifically. Then, if there's some commonality across individuals you interview, that's a bonus. That's something where you can have themes that link across all of the individuals in your interviews. You're not necessarily searching for that. Even someone that's different, somebody talks about something completely different from the other people that are being interviewed, that still can be important, and that still can be a theme as well. Even only one person mentions it, it's still insightful, it's still important, it's still something that is useful. It doesn't have to be a collective thing. Like quantitative is like that, where it's about analysing people in a group and getting a score that sort of indicates their level of depression, their level of stress, whatever. And that then is a conclusion drawn about that group of individuals. That's a nomothetic approach, the group approach, generalizing explanations, trying to summarize for a lot of individuals. Okay. So qualitative can delve into more everyday life. The argument is social reality constructed by the individual. That's constructivism. That's a philosophy behind qualitative research, constructivism. So that's constructivism. That connects into phenomenology, which is another philosophy in the area, another approach within the qualitative field. So we construct the world around us, basically then. That's our perception of the world, we construct it. We have our personal feelings around that, our personal consciousness of that as well. And that leads into phenomenology. It's about the personal experiences that define your world, your previous, past personal experiences, and your present ones. Obviously, the ones in the future also influence how you see the world, how you construct the world around you. Now, we could do that with a questionnaire as well, I suppose, too. we could have questions around perceptions of the world and so on, around the person, their feelings about that and so on too. But it's obviously doing interviews, it's much more open for discovery and exploration and going deeper into why the person feels that way as well. It goes deeper into the why. So while quantitative is more external and static and compared for the individual. So because you're trying to look at the collective, all these individuals together as a group. So you're more externalized and you're trying to stand back and summarize them all rather than look into the one person, basically then and construct things around their life. So that's qual versus quant again. Okay, so this is moving into planning. This is question 2 now. So we'll stop at this point. So let's move into question 2. And we'll start into doing the actual worksheet 1, question 1 in the worksheet then. So from qualitative study, that's moving into question 2. So we'll bring up the worksheet. And what I've highlighted so far here in the slides really links into this question then. So we'll bring up the question 1 in your worksheet here. And I'll just see if I can make this a bit bigger. And I'll draw here. Okay, as well. Okay, all right. So question 1 is the differences between qualitative and quantitative. I'm just going to try and keep it simple here and have 2 sides. Basically, then we have the quantitative and we have the qualitative here. One way you could do this when you're typing it out is do a table, basically then, or bullet point form, basically as well, where even you're taking segments from the slides and bringing those in bullet point form across the 2 sides there, and compare and contrast that way. That would work. That would save a bit of time in terms of typing out an explanation. So you have the quantitative versus qualitative here. First of all, we mentioned natural science. So there's a link there to natural science for quantitative. That's the gold standard. That's where we're trying to strive towards in terms of quantitative research. So that's what psychology is always trying to do. They're always trying to work against the softer, they say you're a soft science. Psychology is a soft science, not a hard science. They're always trying to get harder. They're trying to toughen themselves up, really, by the way we use the methods. So we're really rigorous with our methods and how we construct questionnaires, how we could do experiments, because we're trying to fend off all of those other scientists out there that do the hard sciences, to say that the chemists, the biologists and so on out there. So we're trying to fight against them and their criticisms by doing everything even more stringent and more systematic as them, basically then. So we're trying to measure things precisely, so precise measurement. So precise measurement. So that's one thing that's obviously a gold standard for natural science. We're going to stick to the facts. We're trying to be as factual as possible. Okay. So these are the things that are all hallmarks of natural science, of the gold standard in terms of the scientific approach to doing research. That's the hard sciences, they call themselves. Yeah. But there's also control is important in that, and manipulation. Okay, so control and manipulation of variables. That's the experiments then, that's doing experiments, basically then, okay? That's doing the experiments. You have the philosophy of positivism as well in that, okay? That philosophy underlies measurement and so on of your variables. So measurement, so it links into measurement. Okay. And your understanding of the variables as well, so understanding. And the logic of quantitative then as well, so quantitative approach. Okay. So the logic, the measurement, the understanding, this all underpins positivism, underpins the quantitative approach. Let's go to qualitative a wee bit here. Okay, and so what, in contrast to natural science, have we with qualitative then? When we look at precise measurement, for instance, control and things. What can we say about qualitative and those senses, those things? So what can we say about qualitative in terms of the contrast to that?
Help us. Give us the words, Gary.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite.
It's individual. I know, like, what's the opposite of natural science? It's individualistic.
It's an individual perspective. Yep. So individual perspective. So it's individual perspective. Okay, with that. So that's one thing. Individual perspective. That's a terrible writing I got here. Individual perspective. Okay. So that's one aspect. Because we don't have control, we don't manipulate variables as well, basically then. Okay.
Subjective.
So it's subjective, yeah, there's some subjectivity to it. And there's basically then we're not controlling, so we cannot control. We cannot control, basically then. Okay. And we're also looking at things that are difficult to conceptualize. So we're looking at things that are difficult to conceptualize, okay, as well. So things that would be hard to measure on a questionnaire, we could discuss in interviews with an individual. Something that's a bit more deeper, and we're trying to get more insight from the individual and to get to think about those things more, basically, as well.
Something that's introspective rather than observable.
Yeah, introspective. Yep, introspective.
Is that all just the same thing, just said differently, though?
Yeah, there is an element of that with individual perspective, introspective being in there. You could say that's rich and deep then, basically then when you're looking introspectively, because you're trying to think more deeply about an issue that's important to you, basically then. And there's a richness there because you're trying to, whenever you're being interviewed, you're trying to get that or communicate that across the interviewer. So you're trying to look at deeply in yourself and give a rich answer with as much detail as you can in terms of why you feel that way or why you've done that thing, why you have that attitude, and so on, basically then. So you're just trying to introspect and give it out in a language that it's deep enough to get across what you feel, basically. And we should not be able to do it in a questionnaire because you're just given the choice of the answers to choose between in a closed answer survey format. So it's rich and deep. Yep, and that individual perspective coming through, basically, as well. So I've mentioned interviews and so on there, of course, from this. You'll have interviews, you have focus groups and so on as methods to do that. Okay, so you have those sort of approaches. So these are going to be in-depth interviews as well, so, and in-depth focus groups approach as well from a collective point of view there as well. Your focus is on the individual, basically perspective as well. So there's the knowledge of the individual is important. They're the expert. So the knowledge is important there when you focus on the individual, basically then. Okay. There's control and manipulation of variables. There's a logic and so on, and there's a structure there, while of course qualitative is unstructured. And you've got the quantitative is structured, obviously, then from all of that approaches mentioned there, so it's unstructured, basically then. Okay. We mentioned cause and effect as well in those slides. So cause and effect was covered too in terms of a major issue in terms of quantitative, in terms of experimental work, getting at the independent variable influencing the dependent variable. For instance, those who got the drug versus those who don't get the drug, is performance improved for the group that got the drug, basically, for instance, if that's a dependent variable. So you're precisely measuring there, you're controlling for where they're in the drug or the no drug group, and then you're measuring precisely the performance via that speed in which they do something, so it's timed by a stopwatch, for instance. Or there's some other test that's being done for performance, an aptitude test of some sort, which is very precisely measured, for instance, as well. So we can generalize, so generalizability, so generalizing. So generalization is important, basically, then as well. Another thing that's important in terms of quantitative, basically then. Okay. Why it's not important for qualitative. Okay. So you don't generalize. So they don't generalize. So there's no generalization there. Okay. Because it's the ideographic approach, basically then. It's individual again, just a grander term is used for individual perspective again. So ideographic. Why that's nomothetic for quantitative, because you're basing it on groups, going to the population then basically then, generalizing to the population. Okay, so it's a group, nomothetic. Okay.
So Gary, when it comes to doing this, if one were to implant what we're doing here, would that not be plagiarism?
Well, it's just it's covered in the slides anyway. You see as well, so it's just giving you just to actually fill in these.
I don't mean literally copy and paste, by the way. I mean obviously work it up in our own way.
Well, it's just I'm working around what's covered in the slides. So what you'll be doing as well, basically.
Okay.
Then. So it's just bringing out the content from the slides to compare and contrast quantitative and qualitative. I've started you off on this question. Maybe I can let you finish this one for next week.
I was just going to say, Emer, stop with the comments.
So I can let you finish this one for next week. Really, it's just those first slides I've went through there in terms of the question one. There's there's particular highlighted I've highlighted parts of those slides as well, which would be relevant. And all I've been doing is putting the highlighted parts in so far, really into the answer for this question one. So there's other bits of highlighted areas within that first set of slides there we've covered just prior to this, which will be relevant for this question. So we can finish this off if you want for next time then. And we'll do question 2 next week then. We'll start it off again as well. Maybe you'll have worked through question 2 a bit and you can make suggestions in terms of question 2 and question 3 next week, at least.
Our WhatsApp group is just going to blow up and it'll all be directed at me.
But it's all in there in the slides anyway. So from planning onwards there, for instance, then is question 2. Ethics is question 3 when you go into slides and that. Then towards the end of that set of slides, you'll start